going to get started. You want to get ready? This is Gina Tompkins. I think a lot of y'all probably know Gina. She is married to Destin, and he is a physician over in Nixa, and they have 3 precious kiddos. 2 girls, and then sweet Benjamin, who I just learned was his birthday's coming up this weekend.
Sunday, he'll tell you about it.
He was just telling me about it over there in the kids area. They have adopted sweet Benjamin, and of course Lane and I have adopted ours as well, and Lindsay. There's so many of us that have, and there's just a common bond that happens when through adoption and with families, and so I love seeing how God has just knitted their family together from across the world over here to Ozark, so it's really neat. But Gina is an awesome Bible teacher. You've been in her small group. I was in her small group last time. She teaches a lesson at the table before she even gets up here, so it's pretty exciting. So anyway, share with us. Okay. Oh, I'm taking it. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
Okay, so that walk up the stairs, it was harder than it should have been. A couple days ago, I was so multitasking, right? How we do. So I was lifting weights and Benjamin was, the girls were at school, Benjamin was downstairs with me. I was lifting weights, I was eating the pizza he was cooking me, like the pretend food, and I was printing a banner for his birthday coming up that he will tell you about. And so I was doing everything, I lost count so many times about what rep number I was on, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll just start at 10, I don't know. Anyway, well, I did way too many apparently, because I can hardly lift my arm over my head or walk up the stairs. So multitasking did not go well that time. And if I speak as though I am like on testosterone therapy or something, I just have this stuff happening. So I have been COVID tested. Dustin tested me and enjoyed it way too much. So I have been COVID tested and I do not have it. It's just the change of weather or allergies or something. But anyway, so all right. Well, I'm going to pray before we get started, and we'll get into it. Dear Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to come before you, to gather together in like-mindedness and in one accord. We thank you for your word and its life-giving. We thank you that it also separates bone from marrow within us. We thank you for your presence in us and in this place. I pray that your word would not go out void today, but that maybe it's not life-changing, but maybe it will draw us each closer to the heart of you and to be more like you in this world. Help me to be clear-minded and present this as though your will would have me. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so Ecclesiastes. So I've said this before, I'm like non-emotional, but I'm also very like straightforward, like this is what makes sense, this is what doesn't make sense. So anyway, so Ecclesiastes, when I found out we were doing Ecclesiastes, I thought, Ecclesiastes. I thought, I should probably beef up on my Ecclesiastes before this happened. So I was very unfamiliar with Ecclesiastes, I will say. I mean, I could maybe give you some basics, but Ecclesiastes was not one that I run to, like, I'm running to Ecclesiastes. It's just not one of those for me. So as we were sitting down discussing like who was going to take which section, I was just kind of flipping through, and I stopped at the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh, and I laughed. I'm like, oh, that would be a fun one to teach, right? So here we are, chapter 4, where the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. No, but as we're going through Ecclesiastes, I've learned a lot through Ecclesiastes, and maybe because I had very little base knowledge of it. But it's been interesting to study. But I picture Solomon, and I was telling Erin about this on Sunday, and how she has said that he's wise, and we know the Bible has told us he's wise. I just have a hard time not picturing him as this man who like has scraggly hair and is like pulling at it, like, like in chapter 4, he's very much going from one thing to the next. Or if you give a mouse a cookie, have you ever read If You Give a Mouse a Cookie to Your Children? This is what I feel like when I read this. I'm sure it's not how Solomon felt, but it just feels a lot like If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. And it's kind of like when I make my tea in the morning, I do 18 things on the way to get my tea, and my tea's cold. So that's kind of, he's going from one subject to the other and hopping around. So to get it clearly in our minds, we're going to read it really fast. But before we do, I don't have like a punchline or a line that this all sums up to go under. But I do have a couple of things that I want you to think as we read about these different scenarios or these different types of people. in chapter 4. So slavery is our beginning, but it absolutely is not supposed to be our end. So as we're doing this, I want you to think about the scales, or I want you to think about bondage versus freedom. So as I was preparing for this, the commentary, I just didn't find anything new in commentary. They all kind of agreed with one another, which also agreed with what you just studied and what you're going to read tomorrow in your commentary. So I was just praying that God would show me some way to help this to fit into the squares in my brain. And so it just clearly came over and over and over, bondage versus freedom. And so maybe what earthly bondage and earthly freedom means is very different than what spiritual bondage and spiritual freedom means. So if I had a felt board up here, so like I said, I like to teach kids. So if I had a felt board up here, I would have bondage and freedom, and we would take apart every one of these different types of people, and we would find out what is our bondage here and what is our freedom and what sits on the throne of our heart. So that's what we're going to break this down in today through. So Solomon here is presenting an analysis of values that the world holds in high esteem. And so it's not what we know as what the Bible has told us should be held in high esteem, but this is what Solomon is looking at the world and saying, the world holds this on a pedestal. This, and this, these things. So we're going to just briefly talk about the oppression, because it's one of those things that's stuck in here. I don't understand why, and I don't know how to teach it other than what it says. So we're just going to do verses 1 to 3 quickly. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought, the dead who are already dead, more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. And the only other time we hear that I found that we hear this in the Bible is with Job, who Job said, it's better for me not even to be born. And he's sitting around this fire with boils on his body, and his friends have betrayed him, and his wife is telling him to curse God and die. And he's in a really bad place. And that's the only other time that I found that we even get to this point of it's better to not even have been born. So we were talking a little bit on our table about how we don't know oppression. We don't experience it, no matter what your bad day is, no matter what my bad day is. We don't have that type of oppression. So we may feel like the world is against us, but if we think about the context here, we're not oppressed. However, there are those that are oppressed. What he noticed oppression in the halls of justice. So in the court, whereas Solomon was a wise king who was honest in his dealings, he was not able to guarantee that everyone under him in every court below him was honest. And so he comes down from his ivory tower to see that the halls of justice are exploited. People are hungry for money, their power, they're being bribed. And so they kind of get entangled in this cycle of, well, I'm doing this for you to give me more power, but then I'm stuck here. Like, it only continues to roll and roll and roll in a situation where they couldn't get out of. He also noticed pain and sorrow in innocent people. And then something that is us in this is he noticed the unconcern by those who could have brought comfort. And so that could be us. When I was in elementary school, I remember learning about, I'm 38, so whenever I was in elementary school. Anyway, I remember hearing about save the dolphins and the sea turtles and things like that. And so my personality is very much like, oh, there's a problem, let's go take care of it. Let's do it, let's fix this problem. And so this is hard for me because you can see all that's going on in the world, and you can get so overwhelmed you do nothing. So I've been guilty of that. So all I would have to say about oppression is pray that God would speak to you about, put on your heart over and over and over again the place where you fit, that fits where your skills are, that fits where your heart is. So many of us have adopted, but not everybody in this room should adopt. So pray that God would put on your heart where specifically, out of your little home and out of your thing, there is oppression in the world. How can we not be unconcerned, like Solomon was talking about? All right. I'm going to skip over that because we don't have a whole lot of time. All right, so let's get into verse 4. All right, so this is where my felt word comes in, and it's bondage versus freedom. Then I saw, this is verse 4, then I saw that all toil and all skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and striving after wind. So, work is a part of God's plan. Genesis 2:15. The Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. Work is a part of our job. Whatever our work is God's plan. However, in this situation, we're getting to the bottom of this worker's hands, to his heart. So, is this worker, so we have this person here. However, we're stepping into ourselves and we're thinking about this myself. So when I am working, whatever I am doing, and I don't mean your job like that you go to every day, or you don't, we're all here, right? So maybe we have unconventional jobs. But as we're doing our work, are we doing it to provide something useful? Are we doing it so the worker here would be, is he producing a beautiful product? Is he producing a useful product? Or is his heart, I'm going to be number one, I'm going to be better than the person next to me. I am competing because I want the accolades for it, or I want mine to be bigger than theirs, whatever they're producing. So I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I partly homeschool our kids. So is my work making sure my child has a better grade than the child that's next to her? Is my work that my house is cleaner than the person who comes over? So put this into our own lives. I don't want us to read this as though it's just making iron like they would have made or something, but really put yourself into this position. All right, so we can live on less and be content. So it's not saying don't work. We're supposed to work, but keep it in a balance. We're going to talk about the balanced man in a few minutes. So I'll have a story for this one. So Dustin and I have been married for 15 and a half years, I guess. So he came from Bentonville, Arkansas. I don't know if you know anything about Bentonville, Arkansas, but if you don't, it is a little bit of a rat race and a ladder that never has a top. So that is Bentonville, and I came from Thornfield. So it's the ville versus the field, right? So I came from Thornfield. It's a town of 40 people, and we didn't have a rat to race. It is country. We go to school, we come home, we'd work the garden, and we'd be flat tired, and we'd go to bed. So it was just all farmland. We worked our jobs. We were friends. It just wasn't at all like that. So when we get married, so you know all the things that you do that are interesting that you didn't expect. This was one of those things. So it didn't matter to me what our car was or what. When we were dating, I don't even know how he fell in love with me, because I probably wore things that were 10 years out of style. It wasn't something I ever caught up on. And so I think, how did God even put this together? But so we had to reconcile that. And so that has been something that has been interesting in our marriage, because there is a little bit of striving that comes with one of us. And there is, and that is something that can absolutely be redeemed. However, it's not always an easy battle. So while it's iron working here, or whatever they may have been making here, and with us, it can be exactly where we are. So it can be like homemaking or anything like that. So our bondage, if we were the striving man, our bondage would be envy or striving, right? So our bondage, what would keep this man or us in bondage, would be envy of what someone else has, or just our striving, even our personality. I can be a striving personality, not in, anyway, I won't go there. Okay, so freedom. So my freedom in this would be contentment. And so my bondage would be this continual like, I've got to have more than my neighbor, or what I see on Instagram. I have fallen into that trap. Look at this beautiful home inside this home on Instagram. Like, I need that furniture, you know? So that could be my striving. So my bondage is the envy of someone I see on Instagram who knows, like, is it real or not? I don't know. Anyway, but my freedom can be contentment in what I have. My freedom can be, thank you for giving me the blessings that I have. Thank you for what I do have, and being content with that. I will tell a story. So back to this Benville Thornfield thing, I forgot about this one. So there was a time when we were first married. I was a teacher, he was a pharmacy tech, and we had like $100 in the bank at the end of the month. And I wasn't pregnant at this point, I don't think, but anyway. So I said, Dustin, we lived on less. Like, we were definitely not striving at this point. There was no possible way for us to strive. We were saving because we knew every single penny mattered. And so it was when we were in West Virginia, and chicken nuggets, I've told the story if you've heard it, just ignore it, but chicken nuggets at McDonald's were 99 cents. You get 4 for 99 cents. And so we did not eat out. Like, it was a luxury we didn't even think about because we knew we couldn't. And so I said, Dustin, let's go. Let's just get, like, I want to cook. Let's just get chicken nuggets. I just asked for chicken nuggets, 99 cent chicken nuggets. He's like, no, we have food in the house. So anyway, so I tell you that story, not because he's cheap, but because it was important at that point. And now too, but for us to be content with, you know what, we need to cook. Maybe it's hamburger helper. Every time we went home to my parents' and my grandparents' house, my grandma Margie would load us up with 10 boxes of hamburger helper. And so we had hamburger helper a whole lot during those first years of marriage. So, you know what, and it's a funny story, you know, and life goes on. But be content with where you are and living on less, if that means living on less. And it did. When we had a child, it was a matter of me quitting work. Not only did we live on less, but now I was going to quit work because it was important for me to stay home. So now we're really living on less. So make those sacrifices. Those sacrifices that you make are so much better than being a striving man. And so I always like to give a couple of verses extra about these somewhere else in the Bible. So Proverbs 14:30 says, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. And 1 Timothy 6 through 12 says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. And Philippians 4:11 through 13 says, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and facing hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Sometimes we don't think about I can do all things when we're starving, right? We put I can do all things in our fridge, but maybe we don't think about the things that come before it. All right, so in our striving man, so we had our bondage, we had our freedom. So what do we hold tightly in our hands? So as you're doing this, I also want you to think about, what am I holding on so tightly to that it becomes the God of my heart, or it sits on the throne of my heart? So throughout this Ecclesiastes, if I could say there's one thing that it's changed in my thinking and my daily processes, I just continually am thinking, what am I gripping so strongly that I can't just let it fall through my hands if that's God's plan? Like, what am I hanging on to even though he's trying to pry it out of my hands? Okay, so we're going to slothfulness. Verse 5. The fool folds his hand and eats his own flesh. I don't know if any of you studied this out at all. So basically, the person who's lazy is a fool. And rather than working his corn, so he has some corn, rather than working it, planting it, watering it, weeding it, taking care of it, he just eats it. Like, I'm not gonna work that corn, I'm not planning on do anything with it, I'm just gonna eat it. And eating his own flesh means I'm gonna eat it and I'm gonna have nothing eventually. So we are not to be that person who just eats this corn, but rather plants it, works it, so that he will always have corn. So a person who's lazy is a fool and leads to self-destruction. Proverbs 6:10 says, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. So that's trying to rationalize sluggard behavior with, well, just a little bit probably isn't bad. Just a little bit probably isn't bad. And this isn't rest. Let's differentiate between rest and sluggishness. Rest, God has commanded us to rest, right? Which is different than sluggishness. All right, so here, what would be our bondage? So in the striving man works all the time so he can have fun things, but can't use the fun things because he's always working. Here we have a slothful man, and his bondage is leisure, right? He wants to do what he wants to do. He wants to do what makes his heart feel. Follow his heart, right? Well, his heart says lay on the couch and eat your corn, I guess. But he said, so we have a slothful man who his bondage is leisure. And what sits on the throne of his heart is his own pleasure. So his leisure and his pleasure, sure, we all want to do things that we don't get to do maybe, or we don't want to do this hard thing, we would rather not, but it's what God has placed before us. And then his freedom would be a balance of work and rest. So if he could find freedom, it would be in a balance of work and leisure. All right, so here are some other verses from other parts of the Bible to go along with it. So Proverbs 12:11, those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies have no sense. Proverbs 12:24, diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. 24, sluggards do not plow in season, so at harvest time they look but find nothing. 26:15, a sluggard buries his hand in the dish, he is too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. And 2 Thessalonians 3:10, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. That's a tough one to swallow. So in verse 6, this is my favorite man. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 handfuls of toil and a striving after wind. So this is the balanced person. So the striving man thinks that money is going to bring him happiness, but he doesn't have any time to enjoy the things that he has. The slothful man thinks that doing nothing is the life to live, but then this lifestyle destroys him. The balanced man enjoys his labor and the fruits of his labor, but he also balances it with rest. It's better to have gain in one hand and quietness in the other. Isn't that so true? So a bondage to the balanced man would just simply be when the balance is off, right? So he's balanced. He's not in bondage that we know of, but his freedom would just finding that balance and contentment again. And the person that would sit on what would sit on the throne of a balanced man heart could be Christ. You know, it would be Christ. He would not be striving for something that doesn't matter in the end, but he would also be working for God's glory. All right. So materialism. And in my brain, I just separated these into the sections that he's talking about. This is what I'm talking about, like if you give a mouse a cookie thing, it's just going from different things. So in verses 7 and 8, we talk about materialism. Again, I saw vanity under the sun, one person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This is also vanity, an unhappy business. So here we find a person who's working alone because he doesn't want to share his profits. So independence, I would say. So before, like in college, I had no plans to ever get married. That was a waste to me. Not a waste. Like for some people it was fantastic, but for me it seemed like, why? I guess, I don't know. I guess I was independent, and I thought, I don't need a man. And so I was very independent, and I had no plans to marry, I guess. And I was a little bit like this. Like, not that I didn't want to share anything, but like, someone would hold me back, right? Like, this would just be, like, marrying someone would just be like a ball and chain or holding me back. And so So anyway, so this materialism or this working, so this man is working so that he shares none of his profits, yet he finds that he has no one. Like at the end, he has no one. He has basically ran them all off. So he never asks, what is the purpose of this toil? And he dies and he leaves it all behind. I do want to read some, I don't know if you've ever read The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer. It's one of those books that I read every year maybe, and it's always good to come back and read a couple of chapters here and there whenever it's pertinent. So we're also talking a little bit about materialism. He has all these riches. So the bondage for a person with his materialism and independence would be stuff. Like their bondage would just be riches, which that sounds fancy, but it's just stuff. And his freedom would be surrender. Like his freedom of that would just simply be to surrender those things. And on the throne of his heart would sit ownership. That's what and we could all come up with our own variety of what our freedom, our bondage, and what's set on our throne of all these are. But I would say ownership would be the throne. So let's switch our thinking a minute to materialism, to like clothes and house and car and money. And let's switch it to just ownership in general. So A.W. Tozer talks about Abraham and how Abraham is getting ready to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And it talks about, so this is in the chapter called The Blessedness of Possessing Nothing. So this isn't necessarily materialism, but it's possessing, so which is going to piggyback on materialism. So Abraham was old when Isaac was born, old enough to have been his grandfather, and the child became at once the delight and idol of Abraham's heart. From the moment he first stooped to take the tiny form awkwardly in his hands, he was an eager love slave of his son. God went out of his way to comment on the strength of his affection in the Bible, and it's not hard to understand. The baby represented everything sacred to his father's heart: the promises of God, the covenants, the hopes of the years, and the long messianic dream. As he watched him grow from babyhood to young manhood, the heart of the old man was knit closer and closer and closer with the life of his son, till at last the relationship bordered upon the perilous. It was then that God stepped in to save both father and son from the consequences of an uncleansed love. So here we see that who is sitting on the throne of Abraham's heart is Isaac. And this is A.W. Tozer's way of paraphrasing what God would have said to Abraham. It's all right, Abraham. I never intended that you should actually slay the lad. I only wanted to remove him from the temple of your heart, that I might reign in your heart unchallenged there. I wanted to correct the perversion that existed in your love. Now you may have the boy, sound and well. Take him and go back to your tent. Now I know that you fear God, seeing that you did not withhold your son, your only son, from me. That's one of my favorites in there, as we see Abraham has a really, really, really tight grip on Isaac. And he's his child. He's his only son. He represents all of the promises to come and all of the promises that God has already given him. But yet even that, God has asked him to open his hand and let God sit on the throne of Abraham rather than his son. All right. So here we're moving on to companionship, verses 9 through 12. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. So here we have, again, the importance of companionship. So I have a few physical and a few spiritual things. So the physical are what Solomon was probably actually talking about, and then we have some spiritual implications for the same thing. So the first one, you can get more done. So as a companion with a companion, whether it's a business companion or a companion, you can get more done. That just makes sense. But the spiritual implication would be that you could also get more done. You could reap a more harvest for God. Rather, if we're working on this together, if we're in this life together and doing this together, you can reap a harvest for God more than just by yourself. Okay, so the second thing he talks about, walking and falling. So if you go back to Exodus and you think, and you read through those laws, and one of the laws is if you dig a hole and you don't fill it in and someone falls in that hole, you have to, I don't remember what it was, but it was like, you know those laws that if it happens, you have this consequence. So there are real holes, like as Solomon is talking about, there were real holes. Walking was slightly treacherous because people would dig holes for various reasons, and there would be holes in the ground and at dark especially. And so it did make sense to walk together. If you fall into a hole, someone can help you out if you have someone standing there next to you, right? So falling was a real thing, but also spiritual. I know you guys have already had me, and you have the spiritual implication here. We're able to walk straighter when we have a Christian community around us, or we are able to, when we do stumble spiritually, we have someone there that can pick us up, or even not reprimand us, but yeah, that can call us out on, hey, whatever's going on. The third, travelers staying warm. So as they're camping along the way on their journey, they're able to stay warm. If you've ever tent camp, that's the only kind of camping my husband believes in. We don't do campers, we tent camp. And so you stay warm if it's really cold by staying close. And also the spiritual implication would be comfort. We all go through a season of hurting and pain and grieving. And as we're together, we can comfort one another. Stay warm spiritually by comforting one another. And then the fourth thing was, he talked about was watch care to defend themselves. We know the story of the Good Samaritan. What happened to him? He was walking on the road and he was attacked. That was very common. And also the spiritual implication would be watch care for things creeping in, those foxes that try to get in the field. If we have someone who knows us well enough and who's in community with us, they can definitely see a change. I know, I think I've said this before, but anytime I feel like irritated or grumpy or easily irritated, I say, Dustin, ask me if I have read the Bible today like I should have, or if I have been in prayer like I should have. And he's very much a watch care for those things, creepy ladies like Gina. So anyway, excuse me, I think we're at a point where coughing is normalized again, maybe? And we can do that in public, I don't know. Anyway, so our bondage here, so for the person who is not the companion, so our bondage would be our independence, like I spoke of earlier, or our own selfish gain. And our freedom would be companionship, but what would sit on the throne of my heart, if this was who I was, would be greed and independence. Two of my favorite stories about companionship, and I just have one point after this, but two of my favorite stories about companionship are David and Jonathan. Jonathan's dad, Saul, is chasing after David to try to kill him, and Jonathan said, if I shoot this arrow, you know the story, if I shoot this arrow, and what happens, and so David was saved, and he ran because his best friend, Jonathan, saved him. And another one with Jonathan is he took off his clothing, which represented, he took off his priestly priestlydom. Anyway, he took it off as he was giving it to David, and he was, in essence, giving him that kingdom. He was giving him that inheritance, if you will. What a friend, right? And then Moses, Aaron, and Hur in Exodus 17:12. They are fighting a battle, and Moses, as long as Moses' arms, remember I'm sore, but as long as Moses' arms are in the air, see, I need someone to hold my arms, don't worry. As long as Moses' hands are in the air, they're winning, but Moses' hands get tired. And so Aaron and Hur come beside him and hold his arms up for him. So this is very much when I was going through a grieving time. I desperately needed some people to come and hold my arms up for me. I couldn't. I had kind of battled, and I was tired of battle, and I had some great people, women of faith, who came and they held my arms up for me. So those are just two examples of companionship in the Bible. And the last one, and it's a short one, leadership versus legacy. So we have a young man. He was poor. He became rich. We have an old king who was rich, but he became unwise. The young man went from prison to the throne, and the old man went from the throne to imprisoned in stupidity, basically. He would no longer take advice or anything. So from this, we can see that wealth and position are no guarantee for success, because we have a king who is no longer, and all the generations are forgetting about him and want him out. So his wealth and his position did not guarantee anything for him. He was king for a while, but that was it. And on the flip side, poverty and failure do not keep you from achievements, because we have a man who was in prison and poverty, poor, and he became rich. So those things don't guarantee your success or keep you from success. However, wisdom is key, and they also don't guarantee that you will have this leadership that remains after we're gone. Because we know that great things happen and we forget about them. Great people come and we forget about them. And so we will all be forgotten at some point. That's why a couple weeks ago, we learned that when we're working for the Lord, that is eternal work. And the people that are saved as we are working for the Lord or come to know him better, that is eternal work, and that is never forgotten. But that's not about us. So we all pass away, and we're supposed to leave an eternal legacy, not extinguished by the world, because the world cannot extinguish that eternal legacy. And the spoiler alert here is that Solomon, in all of this Ecclesiastes, he comes down to, and sorry for the last person who teaches, because this is part of that, but he says, fear God and keep his commands. This is the whole duty of man. So as we talk about all the bondage and the freedom and who sits on the throne of our heart, as you read through Ecclesiastes, and he goes through he's going to go through a lot of stuff about what the world values. He's about to indulge in a whole lot of pleasures that the world would consider pleasures. So as you're reading through Ecclesiastes in just your day, think about, what am I gripping? And there have been a lot of things, as I have been thinking through this, there have been a lot of things that I realized, I have a pretty tight grip on that. I definitely need to release that. So that is what I have for you today. I have the tendency to talk really fast, and my husband always telling me to slow down. But I know it's not life-changing, but I hope, if anything, it just helps us to all think a little bit more about, like, who sits on the throne of our heart, and who's taking up a little bit more space on that throne than it should. So I'm going to pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for the time that we have spent together. I thank you that your word has been brought forth. I pray that we would all as we go our separate ways, that we would all keep this in our hearts, that we would put you on the throne of our heart, that you would be our ultimate, because at the end of the day, the other things do not matter. The striving, the slothfulness, but that you would also put us in a community that would lift us up, and that those of us maybe who aren't grieving at this moment, that we could be Aaron and Hur to a Moses somewhere, Lord. Help us quicken our spirits so that you would help us to see the oppression in the world, and that you would move us individually to be able to meet needs specifically that you have given to us. Be with us as we go on the rest of our day. Help us to be mindful of you. May our conversations be glorifying to you today, and be with us every step. In Jesus' name.